All right, so this time we're tackling a pretty big one, the history of semiconductors.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive into chip war, Chris Miller's book.
Okay.
And we've got some pretty cool pictures, too.
Yeah, this should be
I
good.
think this is a story most people don't realize is all about war. You
Yeah.
ready to, explore how these tiny chips actually have this whole battle going on behind them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most fascinating things about this is that it's not just about like the technology, the bits and bytes.
Yeah.
It's about the people.
Okay.
And it's about geopolitics and all the sort of like the human drama
Yeah.
behind this, the triumphs, the missteps.
Oh, yeah, the personalities, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Okay, so Miller calls it a chip war.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it's been going on for decades.
For sure. I mean, the first shots were really fired back in 1958.
Oh, wow.
We're talking Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments, sweating over his workbench,
Mm-hmm.
painstakingly assembling the very first integrated circuit. I mean, this wasn't, some sleek Silicon Valley lab or anything.
Yeah.
But this was a moment that changed the world.
Yeah, I'm looking at this picture of Kilby with that first IC, and honestly, it kind of looks like something I could have soldered together in my high school electronics class. But, I mean, it was revolutionary.
Totally.
How do we even get from that to the chips we have today with billions of transistors?
Yeah, well, part of it was vision.
Okay.
So you have Kilby, who's really focused on miniaturization.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have, at the same time, Robert Noyce over at Fairchild Semiconductor.
Okay.
And he saw the potential to make these chips cheap, accessible for things like civilian computers.
Oh.
It wasn't just about making them small, it was about making them everywhere.
So was Noyce really the guy who kickstarted the whole chip industry's growth?
I think you could say that.
That's interesting, though, because we always think of Silicon Valley as the birthplace.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like things were really getting started somewhere else.
Yeah, it wasn't all just happening in one place. And you also have to remember, this is all happening during the Cold War.
Right.
I mean, you can't talk about chips without talking about the military.
Uh-huh.
One of the first major orders for TI's chips was for the guidance computer in the Minuteman II missile.
Wow.
So right from the start, these tiny pieces of silicon were seen as like strategic assets.
And then on top of that, you've got the space race happening.
Oh, yeah.
The Soviets launched Sputnik, and then all of a sudden it's like, America's got to catch up, pouring money into all this research and development.
Absolutely.
I can only imagine the pressure on these scientists, right?
Trying to counter Soviet technology.
Yeah.
Really high stakes.
It's like those chips were shaping the balance of power in the whole world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as the Cold War continued to heat up,
Mm-hmm.
so did this chip war, and, Silicon Valley starts emerging.
Yeah.
It's this hub of innovation. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Yeah. I mean, from what I read in Chip War, Silicon Valley sounds like it was just as much about fierce competition,
Oh, yeah.
like corporate espionage, even
Yeah.
cutthroat tactics.
For sure. I mean, there's this story about Jerry Sanders,
Okay.
the future CEO of AMD,
Mm-hmm.
being found in a garbage can after a brawl in Chicago. I mean, it sounds like the fight to control these chips attracted some real characters.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
It wasn't all just dudes in lab coats. I mean, the book talks about these transistor girls.
Absolutely. These women were really crucial to the industry.
Yeah.
And, they often worked in pretty demanding conditions
Wow.
for low wages.
And it's like we don't even hear about them.
Yeah, it's a side of the story that often gets overlooked.
It makes you think about all those hidden figures behind these big revolutions in technology.
Mm-hmm.
It also seems like these companies were constantly on the move, too.
Oh, yeah. They were always chasing lower costs.
Yeah.
New pools of talent, setting up factories in all these unlikely places like Maine,
Really?
even Navajo reservations,
Yeah.
before they eventually shifted a lot of those operations overseas.
Wow.
So it's this constant, kind of reshaping of the workforce
Yeah.
driven by this technology.
So we've got this booming industry, right?
Mhm.
Fueled by the Cold War cutthroat competition. And then all of a sudden, Japan enters the picture.
Yeah, in the 1980s, Japan's DRAM chips, they really took the world by storm,
Okay.
capturing a big chunk of the market. And it caused a lot of panic in Silicon Valley.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was this fear that Japan was going to dominate the world economically and that America was losing its edge.
And there's that potato chip analogy,
Oh, yeah.
that chips were just another commodity, like potato chips.
Yeah, that really rubbed people the wrong way.
I bet.
It was like a slap in the face.
Yeah. Yeah.
For these innovators who saw themselves as pioneers, pushing the boundaries of technology. And it really sparked this debate about the value of innovation, intellectual property, and like America's role in the global tech landscape.
And then right in the middle of that, you've got Micron
Yeah.
refusing to back down.
Yeah, they really stood their ground.
What's amazing is Micron was actually backed by a potato farmer
A potato farmer?
who saw an opportunity and invested heavily when everyone else was kind of like losing faith.
It's a classic underdog story.
Yeah, totally.
This guy knew about potatoes, not microchips.
Right.
But he had this vision, and he bet on American ingenuity.
Uh-huh.
And against all odds, Micron became this major player
Wow.
in the DRAM market, proving that, the chip war was far from over.
So it's like the battle lines are drawn.
Oh.
America's feeling the heat from Japan, and then the quest for even cheaper chips is leading to this global shift in manufacturing.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
That's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so get ready for a tale of visionaries, global power plays, and a tiny island that ends up at the very center of this chip war.
That's right.
Okay, so last time we were talking about how Japan was giving the U.S. a run for its money and how the chip industry was starting to shift overseas.
Yeah, it was a real turning point.
So what happens next?
Well, this is where a guy named Morris Chang enters the picture.
Okay.
He founded a company called TSMC, and he had this radical idea.
Okay.
What if, instead of every company needing its own expensive factory, there was just one company that specialized in making chips for everyone?
So like instead of building their own kitchens, chip companies could just like send TSMC the recipe and get a perfectly cooked chip delivered.
Exactly. It was the birth of the foundry model.
That sounds super efficient, but weren't companies worried about losing control?
Oh, for sure. It was a gamble.
Yeah.
But the cost savings were huge.
Right.
And Chang was very persuasive.
So companies started taking the leap.
Yeah. And this really shifted the balance of power in the chip industry. I mean, it moved the center of gravity to Asia, particularly Taiwan.
And speaking of Asia, we can't forget about Samsung.
Oh, yeah. They started out copying other companies,
Right.
but then they made some really smart moves.
Like what?
They poured tons of money into research and development.
Okay.
And they really focused on building up a highly skilled workforce.
So they went from imitators to innovators.
Exactly. They became a global leader in memory chips, showing that Asia was more than just a place for cheap manufacturing.
Okay, so we're starting to see Asia become this major force in the chip industry.
Absolutely.
But a lot of this stuff is still kind of over my head, like all this talk about EUV lithography.
Yeah.
Can we break that down a bit? How do they even make these tiny chips?
So imagine you're trying to draw these incredibly fine lines on a silicon wafer.
Okay.
Lines that are so small they're measured in nanometers.
Oh.
To do that, you need a super precise tool, and that's where EUV lithography comes in.
Right.
It uses extreme ultraviolet light.
What?
It's like lasers, mirrors, and just mind-boggling precision to etch these microscopic features onto the chips.
So it's like using a super high-tech laser pointer to carve circuits onto a silicon chip.
Exactly. It's incredibly complex.
No wonder these machines cost a fortune.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't just one company that figured out EUV.
Really?
It was like a global effort. Companies from the Netherlands, the U.S., Germany, all working together to create these technological marvels.
It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And this is where Intel made a decision that had huge consequences.
Oh, yeah.
They had the chance to work with Steve Jobs and build chips for the iPhone, but they turned it down.
What?
Yeah, I'm looking at this picture from Chip War. It's Intel's CEO with Jobs, and it's like you can just see the missed opportunity.
So they basically missed out on the whole mobile revolution.
It's like a classic blunder.
They were too focused on PCs and they just didn't see what was coming.
So it seems like this chip war is about more than just technology. It's about vision and timing, too.
Absolutely. You got to be able to see the future.
And just as things were heating up, a new player entered the game, China.
Oh, yeah. China had big ambitions.
I mean, they've always been known for manufacturing.
Right, but they wanted to become a semiconductor powerhouse.
Okay.
Not just making chips, but controlling the whole industry.
Wow.
We're talking massive investments, government support, and a real push to acquire foreign technology.
And that's where we see companies like Tsinghua Unigroup come in.
Yeah, led by this guy Zhao Weiguo.
Right.
He was on a mission.
Yeah, he went on a global acquisition spree.
He was trying to buy up as many chip companies as he could.
And he even went to Taiwan.
Yeah, pushing for closer ties and access to their chip-making expertise.
which probably made a lot of people in the West nervous.
Oh, definitely.
And then you have Huawei,
Yeah.
which went from selling these like cheap phone switches to becoming this global tech giant.
They really invested heavily in chip design,
And they started challenging American companies.
especially in 5G technology.
So Huawei became a symbol of this growing rivalry between the US and China.
Yeah, it was a real flashpoint.
And then the pandemic hit and everything changed.
Yeah, the chip shortage.
It was like the world suddenly realized how reliant we are on this one tiny island.
Yeah, Taiwan, home to TSMC.
What if something happened to those factories?
It doesn't bear thinking about.
I mean, natural disaster, political instability, even military conflict.
It would be a global catastrophe.
Chip war really paints a vivid picture of that.
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
And this US-China rivalry is only making things worse.
Oh, yeah. We're seeing restrictions on companies like Huawei,
Right.
a push for technological sovereignty.
What does that even mean?
Basically, countries wanting to be able to make their own chips.
So we're not just talking about economics anymore.
No, it's about national security.
It's like these chips have become weapons.
In a way, yeah.
So what are the options? How do we get out of this mess?
That's the big question, and it's something we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned for more on the chip war and the future of technology. Okay, so we've gone through this whole history of the chip industry, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, from the Cold War to Silicon Valley to Japan and now China.
And right at the center of it all is Taiwan.
Yeah, a tiny island with a huge impact on the global economy.
So now, is there any way to like untangle this whole mess?
Well, everyone's trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
From governments to companies to everyday people who just want to buy a new phone or a computer.
Right. I mean, we saw how this reliance on one supplier, TSMC, created this huge vulnerability.
Exactly.
So what can we do about it? Are we going to see countries start making their own chips?
We're already starting to see that.
Real.
The U.S. has the GPS Act,
Right.
which is investing billions of dollars in domestic chip manufacturing.
Okay.
Europe is doing the same thing.
So it's like everyone's realizing they need to be less dependent on Taiwan.
Yeah, but it's not easy. It takes time to build up the expertise and the infrastructure.
So it's not just a matter of slapping together some factories.
Exactly. You need the whole ecosystem.
Right, the talent, the supply chains.
Yeah. It's a long-term project.
So what do we do in the meantime? Are there any, like, quicker solutions?
Well, one thing that could help is collaboration.
Okay.
We've already seen TSMC partnering with Sony to build a factory in Japan,
Okay.
and there are talks about similar partnerships in other parts of the world.
So spreading the risk a little bit.
Exactly.
But is that even realistic with all the geopolitical tensions going on?
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, there's not a lot of trust between countries these days.
True, but the alternative is even worse.
Right, like
So-
a world divided by technology.
Yeah, with competing supply chains and constant suspicion.
It sounds kind of dystopian.
It's not a future we want.
So it's like we're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, we need to diversify, collaborate, and innovate all at the same time.
And on top of all that, we have to deal with the fact that Moore's Law might be coming to an end.
That's right.
So we can't just keep making transistors smaller forever.
It's getting harder and harder.
So what happens then? Does innovation just stop?
Not necessarily. There are other paths forward.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
Well, Chip War talks about some exciting possibilities,
Okay.
like new materials, 3D chip stacking, and even neuromorphic computing.
Neuromorphic computing.
Yeah, it's inspired by the human brain.
Wow, so instead of making chips faster, we could make them more like us. In a way.
Yeah.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
It opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
But it also raises a lot of questions.
For sure.
Like, who controls these powerful technologies?
Right, and what are the implications for things like privacy and security?
Even the future of work could be completely transformed.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really makes you realize how much is at stake in this chip war.
It's not just about technology, it's about the future of humanity.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and to engage in these critical conversations.
Right, because the decisions we make today will have a huge impact on the future.
We all have a role to play in shaping that future.
Well said. I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
Me too.
It's been a fascinating journey through the history of the chip industry, and it's helped us understand the challenges and opportunities we face in this new era of technology.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.
Sounds good.